Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppy. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. Poppy is spelled Poppie, so figure this out. I just walked up the steps. I'm so out of shape that I'm winded. It's just so... I guess I don't walk up the steps. I run up the steps. It's physically impossible for me to walk up a staircase. It's probably not true, but my staircase at home... I don't know if I've ever actually walked up that staircase. So I walked down because I was getting a little bit of something to drink. And then I just ran up and I'm already out of breath. But I switched out. So I have a new little cup and saucer so that I don't spill. And I just spilled everywhere. So I had to clean it up. I was just starting to record and it just boom everywhere at the same time. So I had to get myself a little bit more coffee. It's coffee, not tea. And hopefully I don't spill again. But as you can see, so I'm sitting a little farther back than usual if you're watching. And it might change the quality of the sound just a little bit. It should be loud enough. But I'm sitting farther back and I hear the echo. It's nuts. I'm sitting farther back because I don't want my chair to squeak because it's wooden and it squeaks a lot. And it's a lot more comfortable sitting back here rather than like hunching forward so I'm perfectly in frame. But yeah, so I'm sitting back. I've got my new cup. I just like the fact that it has a saucer and the cup. This is like the perfect amount of coffee and you feel fancy at the same time. Besides that, I'm also wearing my Midwest Farmers Sunday Best. So if you ever go to the Midwest and you ever go to a farming town and you go to a church, you're definitely going to see people dressed like this. They'll have their baseball cap. They'll have their plaid t-shirt. They will have dark blue jeans. And then they'll have boots, or if they're feeling fancy, they will have cowboy boots. Now, the thing about that is that the shirts are always tucked in. The hats are usually like this and up a little bit, but it's almost always a baseball cap. I have friends who dress exactly like that, so I'm not making fun of it at all. I just think it's funny. I don't dress like this. This shirt I'm just wearing, and I'm wearing a baseball cap because of the fact that my hair is messy, and I don't want to do anything with it. Besides the fact that you typically don't wear Seattle hats. You usually wear like farm equipment hats like John Deere or International Harvester, something like that, Massey Ferguson. Those are farm equipment companies. I wear a Seattle hat because it fits my head, because I have a really big head and it's really hard to find a hat. So there's a little piece about me. So let's see if I lost this. Word of the week. Oh, wait, before we get to that. So danielpoppy.com. Check out everything I do. danielpoppy.com. You can sign up on my website for any new news. Definitely do that to get everything right away. I don't send out stuff to you very often. It's just if there's something big. Besides that, you can check out my book, The Ninth Hour. It is an fun adventure story. If you haven't heard of it, I've described it in other ways, but we'll leave it like that. Or One Last Toast for Ebenezer Fleet, which is my serialized novel you can listen to on this feed or read on my website. The 10th chapter came out this past Sunday. All right, 10th chapter came out this past Sunday. It's just going to get better. If you already like it and you listen to it and you're like, I like this a lot. It's just getting started, people. It's not going to be eternal. I know where the ending is already going, but definitely check that out. Listen to it, read it. If you don't want to listen to my voice, I'm not the best narrator. Definitely read it. But that's going to eventually turn into a physical copy of a book, for those of you who really like it. Our word of the week is an adverb. It is pallidly, in a way that shows lack of interest. Pallidly is in a way that shows a lack of interest. I would never use that word I wouldn't use it in writing. I wouldn't use it in my own talking either. I wouldn't actually use that, but it's good to know because when you're reading, you might find a different way to use it that other people that you didn't know before, right? Turning it into a noun, turning it into an adjective. I don't know. Using it as a person's name. It's always good to have more information, I found, and then you have to figure out a way to best apply that information. All right, our accidental essence, we're going to be talking about perfection today. I actually think, so the main goal of this episode is to, I think perfection is actually bad for you. And I'm going to explain why I think it's bad for you. But first, I'm going to run through why it's the case that so many writers, I think, are perfectionists. Every job has a specific culture. Every skill set has a specific culture around it for various reasons. Every what would you call it? Profession. That's what I've been trying to look for. Every profession or every hobby has a specific culture that surrounds that hobby. There's like a cloud of culture, right? I think that's the best way to describe it. There's a cloud of culture around every career, every profession, every hobby. And writing is no different. And there are variations on this cloud of culture, but I think writing is one that is more, it's bigger, it's a bigger cloud, it has more variations, but I think there are certain things that do permeate the writing culture, the writer culture, the author culture, if we want to call it that. And I think this idea of perfectionism is one of them. And I think that the reason why there's this idea of perfectionism that permeates the writing culture is that writing and publishing used to work a different way than it does now. Okay, and everybody knows this unless you're probably 12 years old. So for those of you who were born yesterday, literally, how writing used to work, and it still does work to a certain degree in this capacity, how writing used to work is that for people who, even people who are writing books that are nonfiction, this is essentially how it works. There's a few variations for nonfiction, but it's this way. So you either have an idea for a book or you write your book, right? And then you go to someone who's a gatekeeper. And I've talked about this in the past as well. So for fiction, you write your book, you go to a gatekeeper, the gatekeeper says you're good enough, the gatekeeper lets you through a gate, or the gatekeeper tries to go to another gatekeeper to let you through the next gate to allow you to go through the publishing process, right? This, how it usually looks is the author writes the book, the author connects to an agent, the agent connects to a publisher, right? The agent is a gatekeeper we have to go through. The agent tries to find another gatekeeper in the publishing industry. The agent tries to find a gatekeeper in the publishing agency, and then the publishing industry. And the person in the publishing industry says, sure, this is good enough. Let's get this book published for you. And there's this long process that you go through to get to the point of publishing that I'm not going to get through right now because I've talked about that in the past. But when you go through that process, right, I don't think you get better writing. And I'll explain that in a second. But when you go through that processing, you go through it in a different manner to be successful than if you were just self-publishing, right? Or if you were just putting your stuff out online. What you do when you go through that process, and what people have been doing since publishing started, I would think, or maybe a little bit after, because I think that when publishing started, if you had a printing press, you were able to do stuff even if you were by yourself. But once publishing became a established industry, I'm assuming that it followed that same process, that you had to go through either a publisher or an agency. Now, in the more modern period, it became harder, and I think it's even harder now to go through a regular publisher as an author because there's so much competition. If there's competition, then you are going to have a harder time. You're not going to stick out as easily. If everybody is trying to get a specific thing, if there's more competition, it's harder to win, right? If you are in a sport that has 5 people who play the sport, it's going to be easier to be in the top 10. It's going to be really easy to be in the top 5, right? It's going to be really easy to be in the top 10. it's going to be a lot easier to be in the top 3 or the best person in the world if only 5 people play that sport. But if millions of people play that sport, it's going to be a lot harder to be the best, okay? Now, with publishing, you aren't necessarily the best writer. Maybe you're not even the best storyteller to be published, okay? And it seems like that would be wrong. It seems like that would be a weird thing to say, right? If you aren't in the publishing industry, you might be like, well, that doesn't make sense. The best writer, the person telling the best stories, is the person who should be published. Now, there are a lot of really, really good authors who are published, but that is not the primary reason that they are published. The primary reason that a person is published is that what they make is marketable. Now, in a lot of cases, what a person makes and the genre they write in and what they make. So the genre they write in and the skill line up so that the best person in that genre is being marketed, is being sold. But the best writers in the world, the best-selling writers in the world are not necessarily the best writers in the world, okay? There's a lot of other things going on because you're not just dealing with the writing. When you're dealing with that, you're not just dealing with the writing, you're not just dealing with creativity, you're not just dealing with the best storytelling, you are dealing with the market, you're dealing with what can be sold, you're dealing with readers, what readers already know, you're dealing with the gatekeepers who think, if I publish this book, am I going to make money off of it? And what the gatekeepers look at, what the publishers, what the agents look at, I think agents are more likely to take on a project because they love it. Publishers definitely need to make money, right? Agents need to make money too, so they're going to be factoring that into what they do. And I'm not saying that every publisher is just focused on money. There are certain creative industries that we know of that seem to be just focused on money. I don't think publishers are just focused on money, but they do need to determine whether they're going to be able to make money off of that thing. They do need to be able to determine whether they're going to be able to make money off of that writing. So when they look at a piece of writing, they need to see, has writing similar to this made money in the past? So when you're a writer and you go through this publishing process, like I said, there's a lot of different competition. And if there's a lot of different competition in a sport, you need to practice a lot. If there's a lot of competition in writing, you need to try to make what you're writing as perfect as possible. Okay? You need to try to make your writing as perfect as possible. Now, in some ways, making your writing as perfect as possible has to do with the grammar. Okay? So some publishers, some agents, and some publishers might look at your stuff and they might see all these errors. Now, the thing about it is you might have an excellent story and you might actually have an excellent writing talent. What I mean by that is your story might be an amazing story and you might actually deliver on that story in a way that is extremely satisfying and profound. But at the same time, you might not know how grammar works perfectly. It might be the case, or you might not know how to punctuate properly. Okay, just because you write an excellent story and write it in an excellent way doesn't mean that you know all the little details that goes into writing. It's like you don't know all the little rules. That's what I'm trying to say. There are specific rules that you need to know to play the game of going through a publisher. There are specific rules you need to know to do that. You need to make sure that your writing has as few errors as possible. You need to make sure it's formatted in the way they want. You need to make sure you write a good query letter, right? You need to write a letter to them and tell them why your book needs to be published, or why it should be published, and if you don't do it well, it's not going to get through. So throughout that whole process, your book needs to be perfect in the sense that the publisher and the agent believe it should be perfect. Okay? I'm saying that it's in the sense that they believe it should be perfect because everybody has their idea of what a book should look like. Everybody has an idea of how a story should flow. Everybody has an idea of what should be in the story, what shouldn't be in the story. Maybe there's an agent who doesn't like specific ideas being present in a story. There's a big push to have certain ideas in art, right? There's a specific push to actually talk about certain ideas that are culturally, man, what is the word I'm trying to look for right here? Ideas that are culturally popular, right? There's ideas that are culturally popular. People like you more if you agree with them. It tends to be the case that if you say something that somebody agrees with, they're going to be like, huh, that person agrees with me. Why don't I check out their stuff? People tend to not like it if you disagree with them. I found that quite a bit. If you are like, if somebody says a fact, you're like, well, is that fact really true? People tend to think you're a little bit of a jerk, which you might be a little bit of a jerk. I know I've done that in the past and I have looked back on it and I've thought, yeah, I really shouldn't have done that because it wasn't something I cared about that much. I cared about whether something was true, but that wasn't an important piece of my life. That fact wasn't very important. So the agent you're going through is going to have specific things they expect from a book, right? For example, if you decide to do weird things with your narrative, it's going to make most agents say, this isn't for me. I don't think this can make money. I don't think this is going to work out. I'm sorry. This is a business, and I don't blame them, right? I'm not blaming the agents. I'm not blaming the publishers. I think agents are trying to do what's best for the people they take on. I think generally agents love books, okay? But agents at the same time, they have to be like, I have to do what's best for what's actually going to sell. So if you take big risks, the agents might be like, I can't do this. That's another thing about fitting into what the agents want from you. Another thing is trying to make everything absolutely perfect, okay? You have to, if you go through this process, if you decide that you're going to just strictly publish from a not standardized, traditional publishing, that's what it is called. If you decide that you're going to traditionally publish, you have to play by their games. Their game, not their games. There's not multiple games going on. You have to play by their game, and you have to say, okay, well, this is what they want. So I have to make what I'm doing fit what they want as closely as possible. That has to be as closely as possible with the narrative structure. That has to be as closely as possible with the grammar. If you're a first-time writer, you don't want to go into sending out something to an agent that is playing fast and loose with grammar, even if you think it's better to play fast and loose with grammar, right? If I ever send something to an agent, which I do plan on doing, it's going to follow their rules, but you have to make it perfect according to how they want it to be perfect. So what you want to do is you probably want to find someone who's going to is going to help you, not have you, is going to help you make that perfect, all right? I would actually suggest not doing it all by yourself. I would suggest tapping into your network and finding people who can help you figure that out and develop the story. It's going to be a longer process. And this is the reason why I think writing and the writer's world, the culture around the writer's world, I think it's a little redundant to say that, has taken on this idea of perfection, okay? And I don't think it's a good thing. I do not think it's a good thing. I think that there's some other idea that we should be taking on instead. I think that being excellent is good. I think trying to do your best is good. I'm not against that at all. I'm not against that at all. The first issue with perfection is it's impossible, right? The first issue with perfection is it's impossible. The second thing about it is this idea that that's been taken on by the writers of the world, that's been taken on by writer culture, it's a humble brag. It's used to humble brag. What a writer says is, I want to finish what I'm working on right now. Another pet peeve of mine is work in progress. I don't like it. I don't know why. But what a writer does is like, I'm working on my book right now, but I'm just so much of a perfectionist that I just can't finish it. And it's just like, oh my God, okay. If you do that, I'm not trying to be mean. What I do is I just kind of roll my eyes at that. I'm just like, yeah, whatever. So much of a perfectionist, whatever. Maybe it's because I'm like one of the only writers in the world that isn't a perfectionist, or maybe I'm not anymore. And you might be like, oh, well, I want to avoid his stuff if he isn't a perfectionist. I'm not a perfectionist because you can't make anything perfect, okay? I'm not a perfectionist because nothing is perfect. I'm somebody who tries to do my best, but I'm not a perfectionist because you can't make anything perfect. But what does perfectionism do? Perfectionism, first of all, it gives you an excuse to not finish what you're working on. It gives you an excuse to not just sit down and do something. If you decide that everything you make has to be perfect, when you sit down and you write subpar, then what you're doing is, what you're going to do is you're like, I'm waiting for inspiration. This is what I run into a lot. It's like, I'm waiting for inspiration. I want to finish my book, but I just can't do it. I'm not in that mindset to do it. I'm not in that mindset to write. Therefore, and if I'm not in that mindset, I can't write. So therefore, I'm not going to get it done because I can't focus in a way that allows it to be perfect. So you're never going to get anything done if you decide that you're going to approach writing from that perspective. Because if you want a book to be perfect, you're going to be writing it the rest of your life, and you're never going to finish it because it's never going to be perfect, because perfection does not exist. What I think you should do instead, what I think is going to be better for you, is something that I think that the writing world should shift to, right? Here's the really interesting thing. Here's a little side note that I'll get into what I think you should shift to. What I think happens with writers who have gone through the traditional publishing route, what seems to happen is those writers, they make something perfect, they start to write, if they're really big especially, what happens is they get big. And this doesn't happen to all writers, but I see this in creative spheres in general. They have like a few really good books because they're trying to make those books as good as possible, and then they get comfortable. And I've talked about the fact that comfort is the killer of creativity. If you're comfortable, if you're not trying to grow, it's likely that your creativity and what you're making is becoming stale. Okay? What I think you should do, what happens is that so what I was saying before is what happens is that they write their first books, they're really good, and then they get into this rhythm where they're making money, they get comfortable, they get fat. They don't get maybe lazy necessarily, but they're not hungry anymore. So what happens is their stuff starts to suffer. One of the reasons their stuff starts to suffer is I think that the people who are publishing decide, hey, we can make money off of this person even if they put out tripe, right? They don't put out very good stuff anymore, but we can still cash in on this. This is what is up with all these franchises that make tons and tons of movies. This is what's happening in Hollywood. Hollywood is they're creatively bankrupt. Hollywood is, for the most part, creatively bankrupt. They're cashing in on other things that have already been done before. They're cashing in on work that's already been done before. And because those things have recognition, they can get away with subpar work, right? When you're a writer and you haven't been published before, they don't let you get away with subpar work when you're going through the publishing process when you first start out. But they will let you get away with subpar work once you're famous. Now, not every person who is a famous writer creates subpar writing when they get really famous, but there are a lot of people whose writing just loses an edge. Does that make sense? So instead of thinking of things as perfection, instead of having this mindset of perfection, I think that we should shift as writers to have a mindset of progress and growth. I think that First of all, like I said before, you're never going to be able to write a book that's perfect. So you probably should get rid of it from your mind. You should probably have this idea that you're never going to be able to write a perfect book. You should probably be like, I should do my best. I should do, if I'm slacking off, if I'm making something crappy, if it's an unfinished book, I should finish it. But at the same time, just realize that you're never going to make it perfect, and you're never going to be able to satisfy everybody. You might not even be able to satisfy someone you like a lot. My mother doesn't like what I write. Case in point. Not everybody likes what you write. Even your mother might not like what you write. So when you look at it when you start to write from a point of progress, the point isn't to write one book that is going to change the world. The point is to write and write and write and write and write and write and write until you can create a book that is so good because you have had so much practice. It's unlikely that you're going to write one book that is going to be the best book in the world, or it's going to be in the top 1,000, right? It's very unlikely as a writer, that your first book is going to be in the top 1,000 best books of all time. But if you write for 50 years and you write a book after those 50, okay, let's go 30 years. Write for 30 years and you write a book after those 30 years, and you've just kept on trying to progress and get better and better and better, then you have a really good chance, I think, because you've had such practice. You haven't just phoned it in, right? Your first book was not your best. Your first book might have been a failure, but you kept on moving forward. I think people, and I have this fear as well. I think writers, creative people have this fear that if they mess up on a book, if they make a book that isn't good, people are going to remember that and they're never going to read any of their other stuff. You get to try again and again and again. That's the coolest thing about doing something creative that isn't exactly the same in another profession. Because what you're creating is not life or death, you can keep on trying. You can keep on experimenting. You can keep on changing things until you find what works or what's best. I would even say that you shouldn't just find what works. You should find what works, and then you should find the next thing that works, and the next thing that works, and the next thing that works. It's exciting. It's like, okay, it's, in my opinion, we haven't gone to Mars yet. But right now, I might not be able to go, maybe I'll be able to go to the moon in my lifetime, right? They're just starting to put people up on the moon. They're by 2022, think that they're going to be able to send tourists to space. So it might be the case that by the end of my life that I might be able to go to the moon for not that much money. It might be the case that happens where regular people, not the super rich, can go to the moon. But people are never going to be exploring space. I don't think it's going to be the case in my lifetime unless I live an extra 100 years. I think that people are not going to be doing exploration in space in the same way they did exploration in the Americas, right? Because when people found the Americas, they had the technology to go to the Americas, and they had the technology to be pioneers and have this amazing adventure, really dangerous adventure. But I think one of the best things you can do in your life is approach whatever type of work you're doing in that way. Or maybe you approach your career in that way in general. For writing, I think of it like this. I'm like, well, I'm a writer, and I could get really good at one thing. I could do that one thing, or I could try to push the boundaries, and I could try to do something no one else is doing. And the cool thing about trying to do something no one else is doing is that each of us has our own experiences, and each of us have the ability to try to do something that no one else is doing. I'm not a fan of avant-garde art, but people who were the original avant-garde artists were doing something no one else was doing. And there's still room for that in writing. So maybe instead of approaching it, maybe you're never going to be a perfect person. You're never going to have your life all together. It's unlikely. Maybe you will. It'd be best if you somehow figured out your life and everything was just working perfectly, but you're always going to have difficulties in your life. You're always going to have hardships. You're always going to have roadblocks. You're always going to have things that set you back, right? It's just part of life. But if you approach life as if it's going to be perfect, right? If you approach life from I'm trying to obtain perfection, you're going to always be dissatisfied. If you're approaching life from, oh, I'm trying to create this little cozy life that's in equilibrium, then I think you're going to be satisfied. But if dissatisfied, not satisfied, dissatisfied. But if you approach life thinking, like life is an adventure. I'm going to try new things. I'm going to fail. I'm going to allow myself to fail. I'm going to allow myself to crash and burn because the worst that can happen, especially in our society, is not really that bad. Honestly, if you think about it, if you start your own business, what's the worst that can happen? You go back and you work for somebody else, right? Or if you start your own business, the worst that can happen is that you fail and you start another one, you start another one, you can start another one. If you write, if you do anything creative, the worst that can happen is you just crash and burn. You put something out that people really don't like. You put something out that nobody likes. But what you get to do is you get to look at that and you get to say, nobody liked that. Why did nobody like that, right? You get to say, what can I do differently? What can I do that people like? And once you find what people like, you can keep on changing things and doing things differently until you find something that is completely new, that people still like, that people still want from you. What didn't work? Case in point with being safe. I think Star Wars. It's a very simple story, right? It's a very simple story. I'm using it because people know it. It's a very big cultural thing in our society. Star Wars was taking new ideas and merging them with the old, right? And there were a lot of different people's ideas coming together to create what I would say are good films, to create what I would say are groundbreaking films in some respects, right? They did something. There really isn't anything out there that is similar, that really catches the same ideas, feelings, experiences as the original 3 Star Wars films. But even though I think that the prequels, the ones that came out in 1999, those 3 that came out in the early 2000s, even though I think those are kind of ridiculous in a way, I still appreciate them because there were new things that were being tried. Now, George Lucas had too much power probably when he created them. He needed somebody to be a check and balance on what he was doing. But at the same time, he didn't retell the old story only. He did something different. He took risks, right? Maybe he could have taken some different risks, but he definitely took risks and he suffered for those risks. Now, the thing you shouldn't do, like George Lucas, is you shouldn't give up on creating something just because you fail and fail hard. You should figure out what you did wrong and you should pick yourself up and you should make something better, right? Because I think most people right now, even though most people do not really, they like the prequels in a way that because it's still Star Wars, right? Most people who are Star Wars fans are like, they're weird, they're hokey, but they're still Star Wars. He was still trying to do something different. Now with these new films, they're not, especially with the first one, right? The first new Star Wars film didn't take any risks. And there's nothing memorable about it. There's really nothing about it that entices me to keep on watching those movies. And that's what happens, right? If you are someone who if you've found a formula for making money as an author, right? If you're an author and maybe you're semi-famous, maybe you're very famous, and maybe you stick to a formula for how you do things. You've decided, you're like, you know what? People like what I write when I write it this specific way. I make money when I write it this specific way. So I'm going to write it this specific way, and I'm going to what would the word be? I'm going to manage my risks, right? I think that you're doing the opposite of what you're meant to do as a writer. As someone who's creating fiction, if you're creating art, you're not just meant to be safe, right? Maybe when you're learning it, you're meant to be safe, but when you run into someone who teaches these things, when you run into someone who is a really, really good artist, most of the time they say learn the basics so that you can break them well, right? Learn the rules so that if you need to break them, you can break them, or you can fit what you need into those rules. But if you're someone who is really big, if you're someone who is just who's gotten to the top in terms of the market, right? If you're someone who everybody knows your name and you're not taking any risks, I think it's a waste, because you are in a position where you can take so many more risks than the smaller guy. You are in a position where you can keep on moving forward and you can keep on breaking ground. You can keep on doing something different, and maybe you're just not doing it, right? So I think that, and that does seem to happen with a lot of people, with a lot of creatives who get big, their stuff loses its edge. Like I said that before. But instead, like I said, instead of just trying to be perfect, we are trying to progress. We are trying to grow. That's really the name of the game, growth. Because growth isn't in a straight line. If you look at a plant, if you look at a tree, or any other type of plant, it doesn't necessarily follow the path you think it's going to follow. If a tree is bent, right? So if you have a sapling and then you put something on the top of the sapling and it bends over, the tree is going to twist and then it's going to twist around that. And that's really the concept that I want to impart to people who are watching this, that you're not trying to be the perfect tree. You're trying to be a tree that overcomes all obstacles and grows, and you're trying to be the tree that sticks in everybody's head, right? It's not, you're not just trying to be weird for be the sake of being weird. You're not just trying to be subversive for the sake of being subversive, which in a way, being subversive in our culture is a type of being safe. It's not taking risks. Being subversive for the sake of being subversive it's the same as being safe. It's just with a different mask on it. What you're trying to do is you're trying to be as good as you possibly can be. You're trying to be the best you're able to be, and you're trying to be as creative. You're trying to move forward. You're trying to grow. You're trying to take risks in a way you never took risks before, and then you're trying to grow around all the different times. Every time you fall on your face, you're picking yourself up, you're moving forward. But you're not going to learn as much if you're not falling on your face. And that's the whole point. And that's why I think we should move past this idea of perfection. I think we should move past this idea of perfection. I think we should move toward this idea of growth. The reason why you're writing is not to get straight A's, to go back to the idea of school. The reason why you're in school is not to get straight A's. The reason why you're in school is to learn. The reason why you're writing is not to create the perfect book, though I think everybody would want to create the perfect book. The reason why you're in writing is so that you can learn more about yourself, but you can impart ideas to other people that nobody has thought of before, or at least nobody has thought of it in that way before. And that's what I've got. You can certainly disagree with that, but I think writing is so much more fun if we decide to do it that way rather than just focusing on perfection. Congratulations, you got to the end of my podcast. So you either had to listen to my voice or you had to listen to my voice and watch my face, which I don't envy you. Let's just say that. But if you're someone who likes this podcast and you're thinking, I'd like to support him in this podcast or the other creative things he's doing, creative things I'm doing, there's a few things you can do, because some people don't know what they can do to support people who create stuff. So these are the few things you can do that will really, really help me. First of all, check out my website. Check out the other things I'm doing. Second, comment on things, share them, like them, subscribe. Subscribe if you haven't already. And the third thing you can do is give reviews on different places, all right? So the biggest thing for this podcast is going on to iTunes, giving it an honest review, telling people why you like it, telling people why you hate my voice, why you hate my face, but telling people why they should really check it out. despite the fact that I have so many failings in terms of looks and voice. Other than that, if you want to check out my books, grab a copy of the book and listen to the serialized novel. Give digital copies away. That's a really big thing too. I always want to give you something that is valuable to you. I always want to give someone listening to this podcast something that's going to stick with them, or a book that they can actually own. And you can own that book for very, very cheap. So go check that out on Amazon. The different things I said: subscribe, upvote, comment, share, and definitely give it a review on iTunes. All right, as always, my name is Daniel Poppy, and this is How to Write Good.